I don't understand that. There was once a mystic whose complete teaching he gave in 3 words. Don't interrupt me. If the mind is a knife, it is also a pie. And if it is a pie, it is also pie glue. And if it is pie glue, then it can break a knife. One man had a song. Sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm not. When I'm happy, I'm happy. And when I'm not, I'm not. What more is there to say? Tell me a song with a different tune. A man and his fog. There was a man who lived in a fog. He wanted to get out, but every time he'd think about getting out, it caused him to be right back there. Believe it or not, for a long time he didn't realize this connection. And even after he did, for a long time after that, he couldn't find any way to permanently change it. And he did not lack intelligence or perseverance, but nothing he did brought an end to the situation. There was a man who lived in a fog. He wanted to get out, but couldn't. So he ignored it and ceased his wanting. A general passed along this advice to a newly crowned prince. Concentrate until you implode. A splattered land can be a happy land if it's all under one roof. A man accustomed to jigsaw puzzles thinks paintings look funny. When one man heard it said that the mind is the perfect reflection of what we are, he thought, not so in my case. It is my stomach. And his mind chose to differ with him, as I'm sure both you and it expected. One man's latest torque wrench is, it's bad enough to say anything, but to add a preface to what you're going to say is intolerable. There was once a secret school whose name was, Don't Cut Yourself. Don't blame circumstance. Life is circumstance. Life outside the mind. Is this supposed to be a hint as to where to lay blame? And when will the notion of blame be adequately explained? You mean explain to the mind? Where else? Oh, I think I see. Too late for the Oscar nominations, I assume. A man who's seen only still photographs is startled by movies. A man said, I feel pressured, and when asked when, replied, all the time. And when asked where, said, here and there. And when asked whether he meant here and there above the neck or below the neck, he laughed and said, silly boy. I will beat the horse until he never returns, for I do so love that horse well. The difference between ordinary beach dwellers and the few is that the latter want someone manning their lighthouse. Not something actually necessary, but what they want all the same. Beyond the position of seeing certain things that men think about as being bullshit is seeing, thinking about things as the true bullshit. For a train to ever get anywhere, it must be able to go forward, back up, go forward, back up, run off the tracks, get back on the tracks, go forward, back up, go sideways, back up, go forward, run off the tracks, get back on the tracks and back up and go sideways and so on like that. Conspiracies, distortions, and other everyday affairs. Where there are ponds, the mind sees oceans. And where there are oceans, the mind sees the plottings of ponds. And at least, even without intending so, the mind, by its own rules of logic, makes it all balance out. A man familiar with only sausage doesn't know what to make of a pig. A man went to see a mystic and pleaded with him. There must be some secret to freeing myself from the grip of thought. Please, I beg you, tell me what it is. And the mystic leaned toward him and whispered, come back when you're alone. No. If you overestimate a thing, it will accept your estimation and move accordingly. You do know what thing I mean. To one man, things were all right on the left, but not on the right. Things were okay above, but not below. All seemed fine ahead, but not behind. He, my friends, was half a man, normal and well, but half a man still. One man's approach is that he tries at all times to keep ahead within his head. One man's latest circuit tester is, it's bad enough to say anything, but then to explain what it was you said is unbearable. One man had a dice he would roll each morning. Some days brought sight, some days made blind. A mind holding firm to a cliff must use both hands, and by so doing, tear itself in two and remain sightless. A man told a mystic, I no longer care. You're telling the wrong person, he replied. To tell no one you're hot or cold is to tell the right person. To be selective is no gamble, no danger of coming apart. A building contractor passed along this tip to a newly seated regent. Separate the space between thought and feeling. You can jam up many things, including your thumb and raspberries, but hey, enough's enough. Then again, perhaps we're not, speaking of bedtime. One man paid to have a curse put on him, which was that if he went to sleep, he'd die. My God, what a thought. Forever, with eyes wide open. One man was bothered by flies, but try as he might, could not drive them away. Then upon further reflection realized he was more bothered by not being able to drive them away than he was by the flies themselves. Only hippos will just lie there and take it. Hippos alone in this world are happy. If consciousness is a light shined on the mind, who holds the light? If number two, if A has a B and B has a C, but without a C you don't have an A, What do you make of that? Okay, you want to look at it the hard way? Or maybe it's the easy way. You'll never get free from whatever problem holds you until you are free from you. Now that wasn't so hard, was it? That's easy for you to say. Regarding relationships and the question of legitimacy, contradictions are irony's father, and the whole family's a bunch of bastards. To fault the mind for running in circles is to reveal your total ignorance of the thing. There was once a man who, for 20 years, was treated for lameness, then looked down to see a physician sans feet. Lock up the children, lock up the doors, then lock up all the doors. No sport can continue unless the participants either take the game seriously or else are well paid. A man always busy doesn't know he could be still. There was long ago a mystical school whose secret name on the internet was the abandonment of all complications. The ocean before you want to sail cannot be crossed by boats you buy. A man kept saying to himself, don't leave home without it, don't leave home without it. And someone asked, without what? Without the reminder not to leave home. What good are eyes seeing only one way? What good a mind lashed to a fence? There was once a world whose creatures were divided into two main camps. Those who were bothered about their condition and those who weren't. And those who were bothered believed, with no doubt. In fact, they never even thought about questioning the fact that they were proper in their concern, while those who weren't bothered were missing a vital aspect of their very existence. Then one day a visitor from another world flew over for a full survey of the people and their affairs and could tell no difference between the two groups. Demonic subterfuge as played out in another reality. When the evil one wishes to hide over there, he disguises himself as planning.
No.
And if that's not sufficiently distracting, he'll yell out, "You're late again," and undoubtedly get the job done. A man went to a mystic and said, "Can you describe enlightenment in one word?" "Life," he replied. And the man left, but returned a year later and said to the mystic, "I once asked you to describe enlightenment in one word, and you said life. And I would like to now ask you, do you mean that life itself is enlightenment, or that when you achieve enlightenment, you discover that it is life?" And the mystic said, "Come back in another year." There was once a hidden school whose motto was, minds start fragmentation, minds can stop fragmentation. We think. Regarding the many combinations of disturbing questions surrounding the matter of man being able to dance to one song while singing another, one school presented this simple, straightforward view. Don't sing while you're dancing. As he knelt down and touched the grave of his teacher, he expressed the impact that his life and words continued to have on him by whispering these words, "I am humbled, I am helped. Even though we know that no help is possible, I am yet helped." When in the mountains, one man would think, Why can't every day be like today and every place be like here? When you're in the present all of the time, dates and locations mean nothing to you. When your mind is running on mountain time, no one can then ever ask where you are. Needing all of the red thread he had for a coat, it was squandered on those with empty blue needles. The crumpled up way to finally leave home is to have no one ask, "Where are you going?" Then, every day's like today, every place just like here. Now you're home. When you've seen it all you can say is that, "I think I've seen it all." Until next time. There was a man who lived in an entangled land. He got free and realized he was caught up in himself. A man is what he does. Forget what he says. He is what he does. Time and wholeness. When you're whole, there is no time. A man who's talked all of his life doesn't know there's a life of silence. Whatever method you may be presently employing, always strive to make it active, not passive. Wholeness and alertness. If you're not whole, you can't be alert. A certain man who had made many small discoveries now confides, "I'd swap them all for a continuing rendezvous with the great nothingness." Long engrossed in a picture book, mountains and clouds look out of place. I have listened so much to my radio that the true sound of music is unfamiliar to me. Pulling all of my energies together, I forge ahead. Wholeness and deliberation. If you're not whole, you can't be deliberate. Corollary. If you're deliberate, really and solidly deliberate, wholeness will follow. So explained one man. Upon finally finding myself at the place I had so long sought, I discovered it to be empty. But oh, what an emptiness it was. An army in disarray can always be called to attention. Forces strewn far and wide can still be called to stations. Just because we're not born home doesn't mean we can't go home. A man stood outside the house of a mystic and said, "Would you, in there, make some useful noises so that I too might find my way in?" What magic do men await to enlighten them? Do we not have our five senses and the mind? And the mystic calls the structure to explode and blow away. Perhaps amongst things that mean nothing, but perhaps the most misnamed, misdescribed activity in the history of man is activity such as this. It has always had some name similar to, in English, mysticism, mystery schools, and even I tonight wrote a news item, a little story, and I use the term mystic. It's easy to say it. And people who are even cursorily interested in such as this assume they know what you're referring to. And in all epochs of recorded history, there will be some group, well, past a certain point of civilization, I should say, because there's still areas on this planet that are working on working in a sluggish time zone, but there's still areas of the world right now where you can witness the fact where what we would consider to be mysticism, that is the tribal shaman, is an integral part of it, that he is seen as being an everyday guy, even if he does things weird enough to spook, a Hare Krishna, that he drinks chicken blood and whirls around for 2 hours and passes out, and then they'll take his hand and put it on your forehead, and when he comes to, he'll go, oh yeah, you got diabetes. But the point being, it is not considered strange at all. But once you get past a certain stage of just ordinary civilization, the evolution of civilization, there's no secret, we're not to anything really of great interest yet, but everything begins to fragment, but particularly in the area that's considered to be spiritual. No longer is the shaman available to do such as that. He may become the local priest, but there is still a kind of distance, there is a kind of mystery, and he is up there, if we're talking about the Catholic Church, and he's engaged in mystical, hoped to be mystical, presumed to be mystical, attempted mystical activities, rituals like with the Mass. Once you get past a certain stage of civilization, which as I said is, except for a few areas that are still extant, is encompassing most of the world now, you not only have religion having its own quarter of civilization, religion takes on a capital R status, that it now is like one arm, one distinct quarter of civilization with politics, art, and religion. But beyond that, when you get past that kind of stage of mass civilized development, you will find something referred to historically and even now contemporaneously, of course, but you will always find some group somewhere that has been referred to by some terms such as mystical, cultish, hidden, secret, up to something weird, spooky, that sort of thing. Those that normally speak of such things, and those who would think about such things, of course, do not take such a description or take the term mystical or some secret spiritual group. They do not find that in any way to be a negative view. But above that, no one ever analyzes it. No one thinks about it this way. But if you ask, well, let me just say it. Here's the way it's accepted, is that the group itself distinguished and separated itself. That if you heard that there was some group of people doing something, if you heard there was a group of mystics, let's just make it easy again and call it mystics, and you're not sure why they're not identified as Christian mystics or Jewish mystics, a bunch of weird people bought a mountaintop and they're up there and they've built some kind of structure, we can't see it, or it's got a fence around it, and we don't know what's going on, and boy, are they weird. I mean, since they don't associate with us, they got to be weird if you don't know anything about them. But there is the assumption that it is something extremely strange. And the more it seems to be, this is unimportant, but I can't resist pointing it out, the more that they seem to be physically, observably separate from the mainstream of wherever they are. It doesn't matter what. The stranger they are considered to be, even if the people down in some village, some big city, sees a structure, some sort of mystical monastery or some walled little community built up, and they get no information. They don't get invited to a grand opening. They don't receive their unlisted phone number. They consider them strange. It wouldn't matter what they were up to. They could be politically hidden. They could be a group of outlaws. But as long as anyone cuts themselves off, separates themselves from the masses are going to find it strange. And may I remind you, since we're already halfway through the program, none of this is about anything except the human mind. Forget about cities and mountaintops. It's all happening in your mind. But here we go back to the mountaintops and cities. They will be considered strange and out of step. And when I say strange, just in the full gamut of the possible connotations of the word. No one analyzes it this way, but it's assumed. You got to hear it in your own head. You either hear it or you don't, because this is always one of the things cannot be proven. I can't even point to it. All I can do is say it. It is assumed. It is taken as fact that they are strange. They are out of the mainstream, and that it is in some way less than what the mainstream considered, that their activities must be in some way less than what the mainstream considers to be reasonable, logical, acceptable. Somewhere within those three modifiers will cover it. That their activity, even if you don't know what it is, if it's you have a large group of ordinary people, a little village somewhere, and a group builds something out of town and gives no word what they're up to. And if they don't cause trouble, if they don't come in and start raping the women and stealing all the pigs and chickens, it won't take but a few days, and they will assume, the village, wherever it is, will assume that they are mystics. As soon as they see that they're not actually causing trouble, if they just hide out and they don't come into town. And of course, it may take more than a few days. They'll discuss it maybe for a week or two and see if they cause trouble. If they don't cause trouble, and from one view, if they don't cause trouble, the people even get spookeder. Because at first they think, this is trouble. I mean, they're going to try to overthrow our mayor or the king, or they're going to come into town and cause trouble, or there's a bunch of Tupperware people. Or they're going to start some pyramid scheme. And they'll discuss it. They'll be the topic of conversation, and everybody, and they'll be, we need to call the home office, or we need to be sure and tip off the king or somebody, because we're going to need help. We just know it's trouble. But if it goes a couple of weeks and they don't hear a word, then they'll assume. They'll assume then, wait a minute. And they'll keep discussing, why hadn't they been here? What are they up to? I thought I saw them peeking up in trees or, any day now. But after a couple of weeks, the human mind gets tired of any speculation. It loses interest in everything. And finally people begin to say, what the hell are they? And somebody go, whoa, wait a minute. You know who they are? It's some kind of damn crackpot cult. It's a bunch of mystics. That's what it is. And everybody immediately will go, that's it. That's the only other explanation. If they're not coming into town to do us bodily harm, if they're not a physical threat, they're by God a spiritual threat, which is, say, an intellectual or a non-physical threat. At any rate, they will be assumed to be that. You can count on it. But what I was trying to get to is also from everybody concerned in the history of this, in humanity, except the mystics themselves. And I'm not sure that all of them ever think about it. But the unanalyzed, the unquestioned assumption as a fact is, once they're described as mystics, it's the mystic's fault that they are out of step. They're doing something dangerous. They're doing something extreme. Even if we don't know what it is, even if they're not coming out, they're doing something extreme. They're doing something that if we knew what they were doing, and even if we peep down and they're not doing anything, they're sitting there and look like they're meditating all day, that doesn't fool us. Since they're not doing anything, as far as we can tell right now, I know this, if we were in their minds, it'd be dangerous. So one way or the other, the rest of humanity will have it that way, which is to say life will have it that way. It's not the rest of humanity doing this or not doing this. They're just conduits for it. But they will, without any analyzation, always accept the fact, as I said, from very simple, mundane beginnings, that any group that separates themselves from the mainstream is potentially dangerous, just immediately. And then if they see that they are not physically presenting a danger, then they will be assumed to be an intellectual, a non-physical danger. You can count on it. You can bet on it. But then the people, that is the majority of humanity, then looks upon the area, if it gets to the point I'm speaking of, where they are considered to be a non-physical danger, a threat. They are then considered to be whatever terms current in the time and place, but they are considered to be mystics. Crackpots, cultists, that's what they're normally called, but still it's mystics. That they're doing something that is dangerous, they're doing something that is, or at least potentially dangerous, and they're doing something, even though we don't know what it is, there is no doubt it is outside the mainstream, it is outside of accepted reality, it is outside acceptable intellectual propriety. Whatever they're doing, even if they're not physically doing anything, in their minds, they're fucking around with us, they're playing with us, they're doing something. If we knew what they were thinking, then we'd have an excuse we could go run them out of town or kill them, because we know it's something dangerous. And by dangerous, I'm not, again, speaking physically, it's just that the assumption is that it is far removed from the ordinary world, from what us ordinary, sane, everyday people are thinking. No one ever considers this. No one ever considers that what would be true mystics, and they would have no name, but true mystics, would not and did not start out separating themselves from the village. True mystics did not identify or think of themselves as being out of the mainstream. True mystics would have been the first man on the planet, the Adam and Eve again, to use an archetype. And after they've spread about enough seed to have some fellow humans to talk to, and we'll assume the first people, I'm using it again archetypically, the first people were the first mystics because they were the closest to creation. Anyway, assumed, for this to make any, to point to where I'm pointing, that they were the first mystics. They did not see themselves as being out of the mainstream. They did not see themselves as being mystics. They saw what life was about, and they tried to talk to their friends and neighbors. And as far as they're concerned, the rest of humanity went off from them and moved into the city, and they got weird. Well, of course, they realized they were weird as soon as the first mystics saw what life was about. Or if you want it another way, the first mystics were the closest, and they natively knew what life was about, but it doesn't matter. And then after the first or second generation of humanity, they got further and further from the kind of intuitive, natural awareness of life, the natural knowledge of life that would have been pre-mental. So rather than it being from all common accepted views that mystics, for good or ill, whoever they are, for people who have the kinds of ideas that life is not as we think. I'm saying now I'm speaking from the ordinary view, from the common, collective, sane view of humanity. That is your mind. That so-called mystics they do not accept the reality we accept. We're not sure what it is, but they obviously do not. Or they would be here in our churches, they would be here running for the city council, they would be here in our schools, they would be here participating in our arts, but mainly they would be here participating in our spiritual activity, our religious activity. And they are not. They show no interest whatsoever. You can't talk to them about it. I can't even find what they're doing. So from our view, the heart of life always, and this has nothing to do with culture, it has nothing to do with anything that the mind can specify. But from that mainstream view, from the village view, they look at the people outside. You can take this literally and of course figuratively because it's still in the mind, but they look at the mystics. No one ever questions this. If you said, why are those guys living out in the woods? They go say, well, because they want to. They don't fit in with us, or who knows why. It's as though we are here, we're the city, and they in some way have split off from us. Even if they express no opinion about why they split, they just say, well, they split off, so they're not part of us. They are in some way extreme, they're on the fringes. They are certainly not part of downtown village society and thought. But no one, again, maybe you see this one little bit, there's no way I can really point to this except just say it, is everybody in the mainstream, all ordinary people, take it as a fact. They couldn't even discuss it. If I said, well, did they put themselves out there? They'd go, well, yeah, we didn't tell them to go there. And if I went, yeah, but did they put themselves, the way they're thinking, did they put themselves, like did they pit themselves against you and then put themselves away after they saw they couldn't win you over? They go, well, hell yeah, what the hell are you asking? That's the dumbest question I ever heard. They think, you must, do you understand? It'd be like the heart if we looked at humanity as being this gigantic cell, and then it begins to split, not split evenly, but just it develops a small, it begins to develop a small incision over on one side, and it looks as though it's about to create a spore. It will divide, but I don't mean anywhere near the middle or that kind of thing. But this huge cell, and then it's just this little small part. The cell looks at it as though it's splitting off from us. And it always sees it as danger. It does it on the molecular level, and it does it on the civilized. It does it on the collective level of humanity, as I pointed out. But from the collective view, they did it. They did it because, for whatever reason, even if the majority at the time has no real specifications as to why they should not be trusted, the majority sees it that they could not fit in with us. Who knows exactly what they're thinking or trying to do, but they obviously could not fit in with us. And the unsaid statement there that you can't really talk about is for me to say, well, how do you know you're right? And you can't do that. I mean, it makes no sense because the majority is right. They can't even answer. You can't go to the majority of mankind if right now they're believing there's life after death. If that's the majority view, and you want, well, there's no life after death. And if you and somebody had proof, I don't know what it'd be, if you had a photograph to show him, you had a little pamphlet that could prove there was no life after death, whatever it would be, they'd look at it, and if it proved it, it'd be wrong. Because whatever the majority, quote, believes is what's true. And I don't mean that in some philosophical way. It is true. And so that's why they could not answer if you said, well, this group of people that seem to be, that we normally call mystics, did they split off from you? Is it, why did they split? If you played like you're a visitor from another world, what are they doing out there? Why are they away from you? Why are they away from the mainstream? They go as best we can make out. Either they have specific information or else they just assume it. They will naturally assume it if they do not have specific info. But they will say, either with info or without. They'll say, well, they obviously, well, let's assume that they talk to some of them, talk to somebody. And they'll say, well, it's obvious they cannot fit in to our society. They are, and if you say, well, how do they behave? What are they doing that's wrong? They go, oh, no, it's not that. It's not behavior. It's something else. They don't seem dangerous, and when they do come to town, they're always polite. They never break the law, blah, blah, blah. And you say, well, why are they out there? Why do you think they're away from you? Why aren't they here and part of the community? Their view is, and they could hardly express it because it is just, it's reality. They would go, well, they got crazy ideas. That may be the best they'd come up with. They're just weird. They will not accept what we know to be true. Down at a very basic level. You say, you mean they want to overthrow the government? They want to, no. No, it's nothing like that. It's all non-behavioral. It's all non-physical. But they do not think like we do. And so if you tried to ask them, you say, well, so they took themselves, and since they can't fit in, they disapprove of you. And so they left you. The collective would go, yeah, as opposed to what? You're an idiot? Certainly that's what happened. They didn't know what to make of it. That's what happened. That's what always happens. Can you see that the opposite could have been true? And I'm telling you that there is a distinct, shall I say, possibility that the opposite is true, while reminding you that we're talking about inside your own mind. Well, I tried to be as coy and non-specific as possible. Well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Well, here's the problem. Here's the unpredictable problem in areas such as this. to be vague or allegorical and just to hint about something. I mean, anybody can do that under ordinary conditions. A playwright can do that. An author can do it with a piece of fiction, or an essayist can do it. Can hint around and not be specific of what he's trying to say. A poet can do it. But here's the thing. When what you're trying to talk about can't be talked about anyway, and then you try to hint around and be allegorical, that's when you sort of got a potential bottom 40 acres of mashed potatoes. You try to plow it and you think, we don't seem to be getting anywhere. We're trying to have a tractor pull out here in the field of mashed potatoes. And I understand. So let me try it one more way. Let me see if I can be just cruder about it. But I was trying to leave it as open-ended and sketchy. The whole idea of mysticism, if I may wrap it up, is distasteful, is undemonstrative, is unremarkable, is inaccurate, as the term really is a view of life. I'm just going to wrap it up for everybody historically. Everything that's been called people being enlightened, awakened, being of some other state of consciousness, leave it at this, because this is safe. This will not even harm you children or small animals watching this on television. They see life not with their eyes, but they see life mentally in a way that is extremely different than all the sane, ordinary, right-thinking, decent majority of people on this planet. Now that is a safe statement. And that truly is. It is safe, but it is still indicative. For those of you checking your indicative monitor. So they see life mentally in a way that is drastically different. And then, if you were to analyze it, if I went, well, in that case, we have the mystics over here, this small group of people. Now we have the majority of humanity throughout history. The majority pays very little attention to it. There are very few people interested in it. People such as you here and people watching on TV. But a very small group of people. The people who are interested in it seem to have a very passionate interest. Not a dangerous, not a suicidal, not a maniacal. But those who have an interest in it, it seems to be the center of their interest in life. Everything else revolves around it. Same as some people in the majority have hobbies and interests, arts, occupations, talents. But the mystics, the one thing can be said about all of them, I'll put my foot in it, as I already did, and tell you that their view, no matter what nationality, what race, what era they were born in, no matter what it's called, this other state of consciousness is one thing safely said, and that is it produces a view of life that is drastically different than everyone else. Then if you consider the question, we got, let's say, 99% of the world's population are non-mystics, and let's say 1% is, I'm just using that as an easy figure. The 99%, if you ask them, why are these people separate? Why are they not part of you guys? Even if it's just subtle. They don't have to be dressing funny. They don't have to be living in a walled monastery. But there is always known that there's some people around like that. And so if you ask the 99%, even if they're living right there in the city, they don't have to be out of town, but they're still not in the city. They're still, it is still normally perceived that there's some mystics among us. There's some weird people among us. And if you ask the 99%, I'm trying to make it simpler or cruder. It can't get any simpler. If you ask them, let's try it this way. If you ask the 99%, if I said, I talked to the mystics, I'm from another planet and I don't have any particular view here, I was curious. And I talked to 99% of the people on this planet, and I said, I talked to this 1%. After meeting you guys and hanging around here, and I saw, you explained to me your view of life. Plus, I could see a lot of it, just the way you behave and what you've built, and et cetera. A couple of weeks, a couple of days, I saw it. I went over there and talked to that 1%, and their view of life, maybe you don't even know it because most of them live right here in town, but anyway, I found them, living in your neighborhood. And I found out the way they think about life is just drastically different than yours. And that's an understatement, but it is drastically different. And they go, huh, is that so? And they go, it is. And by all other, they seem all right. They're right here living, but their view, once they talk to me, is drastically different. And then I might say, oh, okay. And if I say, well, tell me this now, before I leave and go back home, I'd like to know, in your opinion, I ask them, but let me ask you, are you right, your views of life, you 99%? And they would all look at each other like, what a silly boy, silly question. I go, well, I want to know. Tell me, just literally. I mean, answer me. Are you right? Is your view in general right? Your collective view of life in reality. Are you right and they're incorrect? Well, you know the answer. The answer is they're correct. And as I said, the tricky thing is they are correct when they say they're correct. So their view is, it's life's view, of course, but it's their view is they are correct. And what mystics are thinking is incorrect. Even mystics, by and large, as I said, would probably accept this up to now and go, what's the point? Or people with a slightly different view, whether it was substantial and permanent or not. But now back up to my redoing of history. Can you consider the fact that the 1%'s view of life, now for the 99% of people listening to this, it can't be true. I understand that. But can you hear both sides of it? That mysticism did not start out with all of humanity, 100% of humanity. And then 1%, what came to be called and thought of as mystics, that they in some way started developing strange ideas. And let's don't even judge the ideas when I say strange. They began to develop ideas, views of life that were at extreme, radical variance with the rest of them. Let's don't call it even strange or weird, and in other words, not judge it. It was just they began to see a different model, an extremely different model. They're right here on the same planet. They eat the same food. They live the same lives. They engage in the same activities to survive. And the true mystics, of course, do not stand out, and they do not necessarily separate themselves from everyone else. And if they do, they don't do it in a way that's spooky. All of that's from the view of the 99%, and somewhat caused by fake 1%ers. But rather than seeing it, which the mind would, it just would. It couldn't even really entertain a question to the potential contrary. It would see the situation as having occurred, that humanity all started out in the same boat, on the same page in the hymn book, on the same foot in the march, and everybody started out. And that humanity in general, of course, always we're speaking of just the majority, the sane, the physically correctly wired up people, not the anomalous creatures among us physically. But it started out, and humanity developed a view of life, the same way as it developed an intellect. And from that, for whatever reason, a small group of people began to develop another view, a different view. Not a little different, there's no word for it, radically different, so like extremely different. It's just it's a different view. And so from the only view possible of this, or the only take of what I'm describing, is from the 99%. And everyone's mind at first would say, even if they didn't see the reason I was doing all this, if I said, is that the way it occurred? Again, they think, well, you silly shit. Of course that's the way it occurred. It started out with everybody having one view, a collective view, and if there is now an anomalous view, a factional view, the faction had to split off from the majority. Does that make any more sense? Religions that have, you did not have first the world is not, with a small amount of examples to fit this, the world is without any. That's why I was trying to twist one to fit. You did not first have the liberal wing of Catholicism and then later split off from that Catholicism. Does anybody get it? You do not have the faction. You do not have the, well, that's all it is. You do not have the faction from which splits off the main body of whatever it is. Tadpoles do not to whales give birth. You did not first have Reformed Judaism and then suddenly from that finally sprang out Orthodox. Factions do not produce, they do not spin off the main body of anything. Right? I'm not going to twist anymore. It's another example of the structure of the mind, if you're falling into that, to suddenly realize what I'm trying to describe, if you do know what I'm pointing to, and then yourself realize there is no example. And it doesn't have to do with the fact there's no example out there in religion and Catholicism and Judaism. There's no example in the mind. It's why you can't ask the mind, did the mystics split off from the rest of you? The rest of you goes, what the hell kind of question is that? Did the faction, did the 1%ers spin off for good or ill? Forget why or the judgment, but did they spin off from you guys? Did this little band of 2 or 3 musicians, did they wander off from this main parade, the 99% of you still marching along? I think, what do you think? You think that it started out those 3 or 4 guys walking down side streets and that suddenly from 2 or 3 guys came 6 billion that we went, well, we got different ideas. We'd like to play some different music. How could 99% spin off from 1%? That's why people go, what the hell are you asking? Certainly they broke off from us. Well, you know something about the mind if you can even make any sense out of that. That's why I put it as a rhetorical question. I'll back it up and try it again now. Can you conceive of the fact? I'll do it this way since I've gone through all that. This is really getting crude with it. That all of humanity started out being mystics. Speaking of 100%, at one time on this planet, 100% of all humans, all, again, physically wired up, healthy humans, that all of them started out mystics. All of them had the view of life that mystics have now. And that from that spun off the 99% who now have a radically, drastically different view of life. And their view of life now is they think about it. It did not happen the way I'm describing, literally, but here, listen, because I think some of you got it. It would be as though at one time 100% of all humans had a mystical view of life, a literal mystical view of life, whatever that is. I'm not going to explain it, but that's what they had. And from that, 99% broke away. And this is not how it happened, but to play cartoon, and maybe you'll get it, is though is reversed to what the 99% would now think. They would think, well, if this happened, if I thought about it, it means that these mystics, whatever it is they're thinking, the 99% would say to me, back to what they'd say, well, you say that they have a drastically different view of life, radically, basically different. And I would go, yeah. They go, okay, then I can tell you what happened. And I don't have to know what their view is in particular. You say it's drastically different than ours. And I go, yeah, I know that. They go, okay, here's what happened. For whatever reason, somewhere along the way, we all started out. Well, obviously our view of life changes a little historically, but the 99% always have a generally basic view of life, which is they think about it. They believe what their mind says about it. It's what the fact is. But they would say, well, if there was a history of this, then those mystics, that 1%, in some way, for whatever reason, they began to have ideas different from ours, and it's just natural. They just spun off from us. They divided. They went their own way. And they would say, and if I said, is that the only possibility? Well, what the hell do you mean? Yeah. I say, how come it couldn't have been the other way around? Who in their right mind would even give that a, they go, what? I go, what if it's just the opposite of what you said? Check your own mind. Your mind would say, well, it can't be. And I can say, well, it technically could be. And you go, well, yeah, but you know damn well that's not what happened. That's not the way life works. That's not the way you think life works. That's why I said it is one of the, literally, it is one of the, in a world of inconsequential affairs, which is the world of speech, it is the one egregious, inconsequential misnomer is to think of such as this as being outside the mainstream of life. This is the mainstream of life. I'm telling you, it initially was the mainstream of life. That after all my rhetorical questions, the history I gave you, it can't be true to the mind, I know that. But that is what happened. And it's what happened to you individually. That you started out a mystic. And it spun off consciousness. It spun off an ordinary mind. It spun off what you think of as your personality. And you, in your old mystical, everyone's original mystical self, you see life drastically different. And the thing is, 99% of humanity, they got no reason to change. You're not supposed to change. But now their view of life, their 99% view, now we're talking about one person. They started off, they were 100% of their population mentally. And they started out being mystics, every damn one of them. A kid is a mystic. A kid has a view of life that is drastically different than yours. And you've got to be an idiot not to, well, it's a drastically different view. But then you've developed a majority. You developed a collective sanity representative of everything around you, representative of humanity. I don't mean it was caused by your surroundings. But then your mystics ended up only holding down 1% of your neural population. 99% spun off, developed a personality. You became normal. You became a thinking person. But still within your head, and it only evidences itself in the 1% now, once you're grown. But your 1% and your 99% have two absolutely opposing, drastically different views of life. But it did not come about the way that ordinary minds would say it did. It came about the opposite way. Mystics are not weird. And I'm not speaking for me or you. I'm telling you, people who, true mystics, people awakened, enlightened, whatever the terms are, throughout the world, throughout history, they are the ones that are the mainstream. And they know it. Of course, they know it can't be otherwise, but they're the mainstream. They are not weird whatsoever. And to call this sort of thing mysticism and knowing the sound it has, it's really sort of, well, it's really, it verges on being insincere. Because it's not at all out of the mainstream. It is the mainstream. It's initially the mainstream with everyone. But then you become the majority in you. Good night to you 99%ers. Are we getting close to having, what's the weather supposed to be? I was going to say have a meeting start at 5 in the afternoon so we can get shit faced.